People care more about what you do than what you say for the most part. And so actions matter. Leaders should put others before themselves. A competent and capable leader is in the business of building other leaders first. When you have people that work for you or that you can influence, best gift you can give them perhaps is the ability to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And what have you done by doing that? You just build a leader.
Welcome to the CEOpeek show, where we uncover the essence of extraordinary leadership by interviewing CEOs with over 90% approval ratings on Glassdoor. Hello, Chad. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to have you. You know, very few CEOs actually get a 100% approval rate on Glassdoor. This is how we picked you and invited you to the show. And you're definitely doing something right. And I read this morning a little bit of the comments on the Glassdoor of your employees. 107 actually employees gave that feedback, and they talked about approachable leadership, open culture. So yeah, I would love to hear more. How do you do that? What's your secret?
Yeah, you know, I, I'm flattered that that's the rating. I always worry about anything that's 100% in the world, but I'm grateful to have it. We've got a really great culture at Boyden. It's a very collaborative, one of the most collegial firms that I know of, and certainly I've ever been in. And I think that helps. I'm happy to talk more about at least my philosophy on how to try to be effective in this type of firm. But let me just say that I'm grateful for our colleagues, and I couldn't do my job without them and really great clients around the world to, let us do it.
So something that showed up to me right from the first paragraph that you said is that sense of gratitude that you have, and you didn't bring the typical narcissism. Yeah, you just share it with the colleagues, and there was a deep sense of gratitude. How does it show at work?
How does it show at work? Well, I think there's the inherent problem with that question is that that you can actually that we have the ability to actually see how others see us, which I think is really hard unless you're walking around with a mirror. But then that would make you a narcissist. So it's I think, how does it show at work? I think people care more about what you do than what you say for the most part, and so actions matter. And I've always thought that I'm a former military officer. In my early, very formative days, it was burned into my brain that leaders should put others before themselves. Leaders should think about the health and viability and the capacity of their people to be able to do their job well. And leaders should eat last, right? And the idea of leaders eating last is it's certainly countercultural, I think, to what a lot of mainstream society thinks about leaders and CEOs. And this vision of the CEO should be the one that's, the top of the pyramid. And, I'm the rule maker, I'm the autocrat, everybody follow me. The reality is most of the effective leadership models I've had over the years have been quite the opposite. I don't know if that's been your experience. I know you've been around a lot of leaders and have been one yourself, but I don't know if autocrat works so well if you're trying to build a sustainable, profitable, healthy organization. I think it works temporarily in a moment. But if you're trying to build a healthy continuum of a team, I don't think that model works. And so I'm happy to share some thoughts around what has worked for me and what I've seen other people work. But how does it show up? I think it shows up when the leader shows up. Leaders have the choice to cast light or shadow. And you got to choose. And sitting around not making a choice is not leadership. So your style matters, I think, and you got to have one. And it probably should be appropriate for the situation you're in, my perspective.
Yeah, there are so many insights and so many doors that we can enter through what you just share. I'd love to tap into this autocratic. We are both in the business of people, and I do a lot of assessments in my practice with leaders, and I see that many CEOs actually shows up as autocrat in our assessment. I mean, they lead autocratically and from a sense drive of control, specifically founder CEOs. I see a major difference between founder CEOs, probably the fear of losing the baby that they created, and some of them are very successful, and some of them are not. And so I don't know if that a rule of that autocrat doesn't work. It definitely feel miserable to work in a company that you have an autocratic leader, right? So eventually people leave, high retention. So yeah, how do we actually keep that? Because being the one that makes the decision, is there's a sense of autocratic in the way that you're a CEO, the boss stops at you, or you mean, yeah, and the ability to collaborate with others too.
Yeah, I think it's worth talking a little bit about what does definition of autocratic mean, or this idea the buck stops. The buck has to stop with the CEO or whatever title the senior leader is. I mean, somebody's got to be in charge and be accountable. Lack of accountability is probably the fastest way, I think, to destroy the leadership capability of an organization. Somebody's got to be in charge. Now, my personal view is that a competent and capable leader is in the business of building other leaders first. If you, for me, a major sign of leadership failure would be is if my team, every decision had to be made was sending me an email or getting on a conference call or calling me and saying, hey, what do you want to do? It's not leadership. That's control. It's micromanagement. And yes, there are times like crisis situations when that might be a tool in the toolbox that you need. And but for most of the day-to-day operations of an organization, I don't think that's healthy. I think leaders ultimately are accountable. I think that to be effective, you've got to allow people the freedom to learn how to make decisions, to learn how to fail, to learn how to rebound, to learn how to ideate and be innovative, and constantly be thinking about how can we do something better, knowing that it's not all going to work. My personal opinion is overtly state that. Celebrate the ideas when somebody in your organization tries something new and that you've never done before. If it doesn't work out, great, but still celebrate the idea publicly. They're like, all right, we tried it. Like, what's next? Because I don't know if you're a baseball fan, but or if you're in your audience, I know you've got a global audience, but in the sport of baseball, U.S. or American baseball, a lot of people go to the Hall of Fame, for a career of playing, and they'll have a batting average of like 300% or 300. That means that they hit the ball like 3 out of 10 times over their career. And I think that those kind of averages inside an organization, if you're 10 times taking a swing at something, and you're hitting it and you're getting a run 30% of the time, that's incredible. So then if that's the case, then you got to set up a culture for people to feel like they've got the accountability, they've got permission, they've got agency, and they're not going to get hammered every time they try something that doesn't work. And, over time, back to the point about leaders, leaders lead more by what they do than what they say. It takes a while, but once you start reinforcing that kind of approach, and people start realizing that, I didn't get yelled at when I tried that, or I brought an idea that, we ended up not doing it, and it goes well, then they'll want to do it again. And I think the most innovative companies in the world are the companies that are able to do that. You make it a safe place. You give people agency. You're gracious to each other when there are mistakes. Uh, and you're building leaders that promulgate that ethos. Before you know it, one day people are making their own decisions, making good decisions, and your only stuff that shows up to your desk is the really, really hard stuff.
So, can you point, I don't know what about you. I sucked at leadership when I was younger. There was a lot of hard work, internal work to outgrow all my challenges that I had. Was it the pivotal point that you said, this is it, I'm shifting? What was the shift to lean into a better leadership? When did it happen to you, and how? What was the internal process that you went through when you made that shift?
The shift. Well, I appreciate the supposition that I'm a good leader in there. But I wrestle with this every day, Dave, and I imagine a lot of your viewers do as well. This idea that that you've got it figured out, and you know what the best thing is. I think that's the most dangerous thing about the job. And so, when did this shift kind of happen for me? When I could, start thinking maybe less autocratically. Yep. I mentioned earlier, I'm a former military officer, and I worked for Naval Intelligence, and I got to work with a lot of units that were deploying or had deployed or were currently in combat, and had a few deployments under my belt as well. And what I learned is that the most effective leaders in the military are not these autocratic command and control officers. I went into the military thinking, okay, like command and control is the model for the military to be most effective. But if you actually go look at the most effective units in not just the US military, but any military around the world, they tend to be the ones that push down decision making, give people autonomy, and they train people to do the jobs above them, right? For obvious reasons. In combat, not everybody walks out, and if the leader gets hit, somebody's got to step up quickly. And if your culture doesn't allow for that, and doesn't allow for the flexibility and cross training, which we would call in the civilian world, like a cross functional understanding of who does what job, and build teams that can work together and be agile. I learned that at a real early age, or at least I saw it at a real early age in a variety of units. And it kind of burned into my brain like, wait a minute, I might need to rethink this. And so I would say that the realization that autocratic command and control behavior is not the most effective way to lead came from a number of leaders I had that lived that. And I think my career journey, my leadership journey, has been trying to do that better incrementally. Just try to practice that ethos as much as possible. Are you familiar with the servant leadership model?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I knew you would be, given your background, but I don't know how good of a servant leadership I am, but as you recall, maybe your viewers who might not be familiar with it, it basically takes the leadership pyramid and it inverts it, and so it puts the leader and their teams and employees and customers in that order, like working up. And the whole concept is it's the leader's job to, you cast vision, but make sure people have the resources and the encouragement and the capabilities to be able to do their jobs well. And that includes expectations, but it also includes tools. And it includes casting vision, but also creating an opportunity for people to grow and innovate in their own space. For me, that's been the most effective tool. I struggle with it. I desire to be a good servant leader. It's hard because you constantly have to be thinking outside of yourself, which is hard for humans. But inside my firm, especially, we're a privately held partnership, which means I work for the partners of my firm. And I don't know how you could do my job without taking that approach. But I think that's the short answer is I saw it early in life for people I really respected and really trusted that gave me the opportunity to grow. And then I've just been trying to emulate that, for my entire career and, different points of growth and maturity. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's how I think about it.
It's funny. I think that when you mentioned that, that was a huge shift for me too. I don't see it as a tool, actually. I don't think there's a tool, oh, I will use a tool to be a servant leader. It's kind of a worldview. And it flips, actually. Now you are shifting your view into the world and see what others needs for you, rather than what you need from anybody else, or what you need for your own ego. So that was a huge shift for me, to very similar to go into and be in service to others. And another thing that really resonated is like, I had the same experience in the military. I was a fighter pilot, and I was actually shocked that the most effective leaders in the Air Force were those that were not autocratic. I remember me entering a colonel office one day, and into a meeting. I was a captain, so young, 22, and he's listening to me. And actually, he used my. I was so what? He's like 15 years older than me, which looks like in this age like ages, right? And so that kind of started to shift my idea about being in service of others and not being autocratic. But I had this innate tendency to control things, and it driven out of fear. So fear, even people that say, "Hey, I want to be a servant leader," they have this fear that they will fail because the fear is very personal, and that's a collision, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. The concept of fear, I think, prevents a lot of people from living their life the way they could be, like reaching their potential, whatever that is, whether that's as a spouse or a parent or, in your employment situation or whatever it is. Like the fear of failure is really strong. And so I think it's a real gift when you have people that work for you or that you can influence. uh, Maybe the best gift you can give them perhaps is the ability to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's something I've tried to do with what was done for me, and I've tried to do with people that I've worked with all the time. And if they're coming from a culture where that's not the case, if they came from a place where it was real autocratic or just a micromanaging CEO or a leader who made all the decisions, it's really awkward for somebody when the first time you say, "Hey, that sounds like it's a real issue. That sounds like it's an important issue. What do you think we should do here? Like, what are your options?" And they go, I don't know. Okay, how about this? You go back and you talk to the smartest people in the company or the organization about this, and come up with an idea and a decision that you would make if I wasn't here. Right? That's what I want to hear. I want to hear what you're the one that's closest to it. You're the one that your group or function owns the problem, or you're right, smart enough to identify it. I'd love to hear what you think. And the first couple times that I did that with people who were not accustomed to that, it terrified them. It was like real fear. Like they were like, "Oh man, I'm going to go and say something stupid, or I'm going to show that I don't understand the situation, or it's just I'm going to say something wrong, or I won't communicate well." And that's all these fears that are running around people's heads, right? And then they're going to be like, "Oh, and then I'm going to look bad, and that's going to end my career. They're going to fire me instantly." And I think you have a real sensitive of that. If you put people in that situation where they're not accustomed to it, you got to have a really high emotional IQ in those moments. So when they do come back with the idea, you embrace it, right? And talk through it and honor the effort, even if it ends up being the stupidest idea in the world. You still got to honor it. And then what happens is they go back and they go, "Okay, I didn't go so bad. Maybe it was a one-off. And then you do it again. And then it goes well. And before you know it, you've trained your team or that individual to not show up to you unless they've got a problem statement in mind. And what have you done by doing that? You just built a leader. You built somebody who's comfortable being uncomfortable, having to make a decision where there's no perfect. Right? There's no crystal ball that tells you what the future is going to look like. There's great uncertainty in today's world. Trying to make decisions as a leader is really hard, but you can't expect people to be able to do it unless you've given them the sort of the sandbox to be able to grow that capability. At least that's what worked for me. And maybe because I enjoyed it and it worked for me, I try to provide that for other people.
It's like really you're having two jobs and paid for one. One is as a manager that's responsible for the outcome, the business outcomes, and one is a leader that actually the role and the outcome is to develop a leader. And sometimes the fear that can be there that, oh, if I'll now do what you did right now, developing a leader over a few rounds, I will defer or delay the outcomes that they can achieve faster by not coaching them to be a great leader, but just go straight to the outcome. So there's the fear can hold me back to spend the time that requires, because that requires time and attention and kind of love also, and to that person to help him to grow, right? It requires coaching, and sometimes it takes time, and the time actually sometimes is an essence to the outcome. So most people don't do that.
Well, there's also selfishly, the biggest effect of it is that, again, if you think about the servant leadership model, if you're actually trying to pull it off, and even if you're not doing the servant leadership model, if it's just more the traditional model, most modern effective CEOs, when they have a hard decision to make, they will bring in their trusted senior team to help them make the decision, right? So for me, I think maybe the biggest benefit of it for a leader in using this model is that when it comes time for the leader to have to make a decision, it's not strange for them to get their team together and say, hey, we got to make this decision. I have to make this decision because we're accountable. I'm accountable for it, and this decision is on my desk. But I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm all knowing and I make the best decisions in a vacuum. So I want to tell you, my leadership team, the problem I'm trying to solve, and quid pro quo, here's a couple of the ideas I've come up with to solve it. Would you help me ideate on this? If you've done that ahead of time, vice versa. If you've done it with them and you've created a good environment for the dialogue and it's a safe place to kick around ideas and you don't have to be right all the time, then when you're trying to make a decision, I think there's a really good chance that you're not just going to get people say yes or tell you that your idea is great, even when they know it's not. But if you're working in a command and control environment and there's a lot of fear and there's not this ability to communicate and collaborate on an idea together, then people aren't going to want to put their neck out there. And they're not going to want to tell you that they don't like your idea, boss. Here's the 7 reasons that I don't like your idea. But that's really what you're looking for and you need in those moments. If you haven't created that environment going into that conversation, it's probably a pretty slim chance you're going to get the outcome you're looking for and the best out of your team, the best thinking, the best diverse opinion, the best perspective that's really going to help you make good decisions. So it takes time. I mean, it's not the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance is just make a decision and move on. But over time, you build a high functioning team that can work together, that allows you to be low ego when you interact with them, and helps them help you make the best decisions possible, which ultimately that's what the CEO is accountable for. So I think it's great. It just takes a lot of work up front, and I think you also got to explain the philosophy to people. You can't just surprise them with it. You got to tell them, like, be transparent. This is what we're trying to do. This is why I'm doing it this way. And I haven't had anybody, when I've explained it in that way, I haven't had anybody opt out.
Well, nobody will come to an autocratic leader and tell them they're wrong, right? It's too risky.
Yeah, you might get something thrown at you, or you might get fired, or and look, don't get me wrong, I don't want to paint myself as like some saint or anything. I mean, I have my moments when after the fact, I've had to, call people and be like, hey, you know what? I apologize for that. I should have let you finish your approach. I shouldn't have cut you off, or I shouldn't have overrode you with my philosophy on something. That happens to me more than I like, more than I'm proud of. But you got to continually strive to keep your sword sharp and not let ego and convenience get in the way, I think.
I think the fact that you actually have those moments, those what makes a great leader. Because if you didn't notice that and regret it and apologize for them, you probably wouldn't be aware of the damage that created or fear was created with others. Yeah, I want to circle back. You started earlier a sentence and say like selfishly, and I thought about selflessness and being selfish, and there is some selfishness in this in the servant
Right.
leader.
For sure there is.
Yeah, it's like, when it's only come for, oh, I just want to help them grow. But the fact that I grow actually when they grow. And part of doing that, coaching others, developing others, we can't do that if we don't grow ourselves. So when I started coaching leaders, I was like, oh, I do it to help other leaders. But I never thought that actually I'm helping myself first. And it become very selfish. I'm growing myself through that process. So it's kind of a mutual, so it's like the polarity of selfishness and servant leadership. Does it make sense?
It sure does. I mean, look, the reality of leadership, especially in the business world, but I would even take that to the social impact and not-for-profit world and government to some degree. But if you don't do a good job as a leader, you should be fired. That's that's the operating model that, okay, we're going to give you a shot and we're going to give you authority, and on average, you're going to make a good wage, and you get to be in the big chair. But if you don't do a good job and you make a series of poor decisions or one really big bad decision, you're going to get your walking papers. Like, that's the deal. I mean, you've been a leader before. I mean, that's how it works. Even if you own your own business, if you're a founder of your own business, you make a series of bad choices, your customers leave. You might be in charge, but you might be in charge of nothing. So when I talk about selfishness, what I mean is the desire to want to do well and to set up the conditions and have the people in the mix that are going to help you succeed at whatever you're accountable for. And if the incentives are aligned, then the selfishness factor can be helpful. It's when the incentives aren't aligned that the natural nature of humanity being selfish can really lead to some bad outcomes, which we've seen in the business world time and time again. But I think you can use human nature, the desire for people want to have recognition, to be known for something, to have something to be proud of, to have their own selfish, tendencies, tended to. You can do that in a healthy way, I think. But let's not. I roll my eyes generally to any leader that will tell you that that their job is to just take care of people. That's part of the job. But you have another job, which is running the company and hopefully not running it into the ground, or leading your local, city council if you're on it, or if you're a teacher, leading that classroom to a certain set of metrics and expectations. So I think the key is trying to tie the culture of accountability to these outcomes that you're responsible for, and then using these methodologies and approaches we're talking about to get people aligned around that in a healthy way.
I'm curious, how was your transition from military? You served, I think, 7 years, right? And to the corporate world, to business world. What was that for you personally?
Well, it was hard. It's a very different culture from the world I came from. I got to work with some really great units, and got to work on the kind of leading edge, the tip of the spear, as they used to say, in several environments around the world. But working in the military it has its structures, and it has its way things are done. The civilian business world also has its structures and its way things are done. And for me, I wasn't ready to jump right out into a entrepreneurial or a very commercially driven role with a lot of expectations on me for generating new business or go out starting a business. Like, I didn't have that understanding, that context yet. So I did two things. I got an MBA with an emphasis in finance, because somebody along the way told me, look, you're a smart guy and you work really hard, but you don't know the language. And just like walking into any culture anywhere on the earth, you're going to be a lot more effective if you understand the cultural context, you understand the language, you understand how decisions get made, and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and what good looks like. And that's different in the civilian and military world. So I got the MBA to try to learn the language, and finance made the most sense to me because I'm like, well, okay, business exists to make money. Probably is a good idea for me to understand how money works inside a company. How does a balance sheet connect to the cash flow, connect to the P&L, and how do you capital allocation and all these things? That's just the language and the math behind business. And then the second thing I did was I found what I call it a halfway house, in that, there's, for any of yours that may not be familiar with that term, that's the sort of the facility that might exist when somebody's coming out of a medical situation or a rehab situation, and before they are fully back in society, there's a place they can be that sort of eases them into the real world. I was lucky enough to get a job at Shell, the energy company, which is so big and so effective, and that it's almost governmental in its structures, but yet it's a highly profitable, high successful, business, been around a long time, that does a lot of stuff well. And I was lucky enough to get a job at Shell as a finance guy, that allowed me to pick up the culture of the business community, learn, apply some of the things I learned in school. And they gave me an opportunity to be a leader there. And so I could bring some of the stuff I had from the military, but also learn that civilian context. So my transition was actually required, a lot of cultural orientation as well as academic orientation to even get my head right. And it took probably 4 or 5 years before I ended up in the executive search and leadership advisory world, working at with one of the top shops on the planet. But Dave, I wasn't ready to do that. Coming out of the military, I didn't have the capabilities or the context yet.
Yeah. So that's actually a great transition. You went to learn that and also join a large company that give you the structure. It's a good platform to learn. I have my two boys. I have three kids. The older one always work for large corporation, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, the big one of the world. And my middle son actually never worked in any. He actually funded all his companies, and he went straight from university to work for startups. So he doesn't have that structures and to learn. He just need to make a lot of mistakes to learn from his own mistakes, right? And I wonder what it will be for them to flip, or to start with a big company and go entrepreneur, or for my older one to go and work for a small company, because it's sometimes it's very interesting actually. But I think that to start with a large one, you get the feeling what is that a large corporation, and you learn a lot how things work and how things don't work in those organizations, right?
Well, like you, I've got two kids. One's 21 and one's 19, and so they're kind of university age, and the technology and the tools that are available to them nowadays is different than we were, 100 years ago. The types of surveys, tools, assessments that are readily available to them to try to understand maybe a little bit how they're wired, what their individual giftings might be, the sort of nurture versus nature thing. I think everybody's got this set of innate orientations to the world, and you can learn how to use those things, and you can learn to augment them. And but my advice to them, and I learned this through the executive recruitment and leadership advisory world, was try to know thyself. Right? Like, do your best to understand what you're good at and how you're oriented, and what circumstances are you going to be most successful in. What's inherently going to be a challenge for you. Not that you can't do something, but just know that you're going to have to work on it. And what are your development areas? And you've probably done a lot more assessments than I have. But one of the things that's always been interesting to me about assessments of leaders is the set of competencies that tends to make them really effective comes with almost an equal balance of competencies that are development areas. And they're like directly offset. The person that's really good at making decisions under heavy stress and comfortable bearing that load, that person might struggle with bringing others along in their decision-making process in a non-stress situation, right? This as an example. And I think one of the greatest gifts that we can give people nowadays as they're moving through their career is an opportunity to have some of these assessments and some kind of tool to help them understand how they're wired, so that as they're thinking about what their curriculum looks like, what their next job might be, what are their development areas, both as a operator and a leader, that sort of self-knowledge can go a long way if it's used appropriately. But there are jobs that just because people have a good resume doesn't mean they're a fit for. The whole cultural aspect is 50% of the equation. The leadership style for that culture or that certain situation. And so I think, evaluating people just based on their resume it's not just kind of foolish, but it's dangerous. You got to take a look at the whole person. And nowadays those tools are out there and they're very effective. And I think not just people that are looking to fill roles, in their organizations should use them. But I think all of us should take the time to self-develop and self-study, and do some of those assessments to get a better understanding of who we are and how we can be effective and where our blind spots are.
Well, I don't believe anymore in assessments. So I think that the world changes too fast than the assessment change. And also, especially from development perspective, it put people into boxes, oh, this is who you are. And they cannot measure the adaptivity or how adaptive people are. And now the only thing that will matter in the next few years is how fast people will adapt. In the age of AI, most of the job, this is going to have a huge impact on your organization. Most of the job will change so dramatically. Many will disappear. Those that won't will be done completely differently. So how do you recruit or find people for the future if not based on their adaptability? And definitely not resumes, or neither assessment will give you that answer. So it's a very great question. This is like, it's a, we live in an amazing time of such a change that we have never seen in such pace before. And it's going faster and faster.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think I'll even be more dramatic than that. I think we're living in a time with the fastest rate of change that human beings have ever seen. Politically, socially, culturally, financially. I mean, and any metric you want to use, certainly socially, like there's just a rate of change. And I don't think human beings are meant, like we haven't evolved to the point where that's easy. Like we're still operating off of like a hunter-gatherer mentality when the world kind of was based around how the sun moved and the seasons. And here we are, you know, piping in data and information faster than we can operate it. And so in that world, I mean, I completely agree with you that there's a lot coming at people these days. A few years ago, the phrase that was everybody was throwing around is, oh, the number one leadership criteria is agility. You got to be agile, right? And I still hold that to be true. But we've moved to a world where agile doesn't even do it. Like you have to be able to build a organization and a team that is good at dealing with rate of change and working cross-functionally to solve problems that are coming at the organization at a fast rate of change. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're the CEO of a global manufacturing company. How many different strategic planning iterations would you have had to have done just this year? Just because of the tariff situation around the world, right? It just like, holding constant everything else. If you're a manufacturing company in somewhere in the world, I don't care, you pick the country, you've probably had to go to your CFO or whoever your finance people are, or your planning team, and say, what happens if this occurs? And then 3 days later, something shows up on the news and you're like, oh, okay, wait a minute. Now what happens if this occurs? So the planning phase for most global companies, and even mid-cap and family-owned and privately held companies, it used to be annual. Right? Heck, we're coming up on October. All the business unit leaders get your plan and submissions together, and finance is going to roll it up, and the CEO is going to look at it, and he or she's going to take it to the board. Remember that was a cycle. Now that cycle's happening weekly. And so the idea that you could just say, oh, we're agile, I think we've moved to a whole new definition of what that looks like. And back to the earlier discussion we were having about building teams that can make decisions. Like in this environment, if you're working in silos or you're an autocratic leader that wants to make all the decisions, I don't think there's enough time in the day to do that or make good decisions. So you've got to build teams that can work together. They have to be comfortable being uncomfortable in a world that is constantly changing and evolving, and it's opaque. You don't know what the future is going to look like. And then the top leader's job is to make the really hard calls. And I can't remember, I think it may have been Jamie Dimon. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But I think I saw something here recently where Jamie Dimon said that CEOs make only a couple of important decisions a year, like really big decisions. I mean, they make a lot of decisions, but it's probably only a few that really are moving the needle. And I think that's the job, but there's no way you could sit around and micromanage in today's environment and get it right. I don't think.
Well, people can try and see how it will work for them in this kind of environment, to be involved in the details and try to catch up with what's going on, because it's going so fast.
Well, maybe the answer is you have to be involved in the you can't, well, you have to be involved in the details. You just can't be involved in all the details. And, my approach has been to try to think about and understand the big items that are on the to-do list that are really moving the needle, that are important strategically, that are important to the survival and competitiveness of the firm. If you get to the end of the year and you're talking to the board about what you did that year, and everything you say is these like tactical decisions that occurred, but you didn't get to any of the big stuff, well, that's probably pretty close to failure as a CEO. So, I try to spend my time, or try to allocate my time to the things that are most important to the organization's effectiveness, both this year and for our plan for the future, and try not to get distracted. Because, when you're running an organization, you can get distracted on, all day long and look up and not have done anything. So that's a constant challenge.
And what does organizational effectiveness, what does it mean for you?
Well, not to sound like I'm beating the drum over and over again, but organizational effectiveness for me is that, one, everybody understands what the board has said my goals are for the year, means that my goals are corporate goals, right? And I'm very transparent. I mean, everybody should know what the big goals are. And then when it comes time to goal setting, we trickle those down, into the relevant places in the organization, so everybody knows how they're contributing to the overall goal of the organization. That might come from the military, right? Everybody needs to know how their job contributes to the big picture. So that's the first thing. You should be able to walk up to anybody in my organization and say, what are your top 3 priorities right now and why? And hopefully the answer you get is, well, these are the things I'm working on, and here's how that connects to the big picture. So if I don't do my job, the big picture fails. That's the first step. Second is, they need to be accountable for those goals. They need to know that that's what they're going to be measured against. But then effectiveness is they feel like they've got the tools to do it, right? And so if that's all humming together, then people feel empowered. They feel like they have agency. They feel like they're being supported because they've got the tools and they've got the accountability and the ability to affect their roles. And so then it just comes down to, if it's done right, and in theory, it comes down to how hard the person really wants to work and how collaborative can they be. And, and so for me, that's organizational effectiveness. I know that may not be the clinical or, textbook definition of it, but for me, that's what it looks like.
Yeah. I see so many people, actually, leaders focus so much on productivity, doing more products to the market, more things, while effectiveness leads you to narrow that to the most important things that matter the most for the organization. And sometimes it's doing less, just focus on the few that will make the biggest impact.
Well, that's an interesting philosophy, Dave. I have my view on this. Others may have different, but I would rather do a few things really well than a whole bunch of stuff halfway. And I tell my team all the time to push back on me, push back on the requirements that they're getting. If we've got 2 or 3 priorities and the next thing that gets assigned to them is going to jeopardize the achievement of those priorities, like, we absolutely need to have a conversation about it. Because we don't want to get to the end of the year or whenever our assessment period is, and look at ourselves and be like, wow, we really worked hard, but we got nothing done. That is the worst feeling in the world, where, I would rather work hard and have a couple things to show for it than everything kind of halfway done.
Yeah. I think this is such a great place to bring us to an end. it's like we actually started on a personal level, and then it evolved into the organizational level, and we see how they are both connected. It was such an honor to have you here with us, Chad. If you have the last word to summarize, what is that one big thing that you see in leadership that you want the audience to know? What is that one thing that you would love to end with?
I think that if you actually care about your people, you're going to give them two things. You're going to give them the sense that they're accountable. They're part of the big picture. They matter. What they're working on matters, and they're accountable for it, because if they don't do their job, like it trickles up or down the chain. The second thing is do it with grace and dignity. Let people have dignity. Let people make mistakes and learn and grow. And I think the combination of those two things goes a real long way. And I know there's been a lot of books written on leadership topics, but for me, those two elements seem to resonate with people a lot. People from every culture, every level of socioeconomics and education, people around the world understand those two things. And so my advice would be, if you're a leader, is try to figure out what your style is and what style should be used in any situation. Maybe start with that and see how it goes. You can always tweak it later.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. It was just great to have you here today. And thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. I'm honored to be here.